Already said, I'm a water resources specialist with the Bureau of Reclamation's Phoenix area office. And we cover the majority of their state, but we do have two other offices that cover parts of Arizona. That's our Yuma area office and our regional office, which is in Boulder City, Nevada. But I've been with Reclamation for 4 years now. And as was said, one of my roles is the coordinator locally for our WaterSMART grants program. So that's primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, is the funding opportunities that we have through that. And so I'll go ahead and share my slides. And I am also going to just turn off my video just to try to save bandwidth and make sure I don't get disconnected. And so just hold on one second while I share. And I know that time is a little limited. So even if it wasn't, there's just so many different opportunities, funding opportunities that we have, that it's really hard to cover. And since we kind of have two working groups together, I felt like I really did need to talk about pretty much all of our funding opportunities. So I'm going to basically do a crash course on them and go through as much as I can, give you a little flavor of what we have to offer. You'll have access to this recording. You'll have access to my slides, which I'm actually going to submit an expanded version. So there'll be a little bit additional information, and then you can always reach out to me for more information or follow-up questions. With that, today I'm going to just briefly discuss who Reclamation is. The bulk of the presentation will be about our WaterSMART funding opportunities. I'll touch upon that environmental cultural resource compliance does apply to any funding that you will receive through Reclamation. Talk a little bit about what the selection and funding process is like through us, give you a few tips if you think you might be applying, and then there's a couple other funding opportunities that aren't part of the WaterSMART program that are worth mentioning, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions too. So the Bureau of Reclamation, it is an agency within the Department of the Interior. We are only present and active in the western part of the United States. So the states that are colored in here are where we're active, and then the various regions as well. So we're in the orange region, which is the lower Colorado Basin. And our mission is to manage, develop, and protect water and related resources in an environmentally and economically sound manner in the interest of the American public. And just one thing I like to point out on the slide is, since we are only active in the Western US, that's where your competition is for these grants. It's not the entire country, like perhaps, like EPA funding might be, or other federal agencies. We only offer opportunities to the Western US, and in some cases, US territories and as well. So like I said, WaterSMART is our primary program that offers funding opportunities for water-related projects. And I know there are many different things out there, programs and products that have WaterSMART in their name. So this is different than those others. We have SMART all capitalized because it's an acronym, because we're the government and we love acronyms. But just be aware, if you see the word WaterSMART, it doesn't necessarily mean that, maybe it's talking about the reclamation program. But we have various sub-programs within WaterSMART, which are listed here. And I will touch upon, at least briefly, all of these today. Also important to note up front about the bipartisan infrastructure law, which I use the acronym BIL, but it's also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. So hopefully you're familiar with it. This is really what's brought a lot more funding to almost all federal agencies that offer funding opportunities. So it did bring a lot more funding to us, as well as some new authorities, which allowed us to either create new programs or be able to fund different activities than we used to. It also brought about the Build America, Buy America Act requirements, which is usually abbreviated as Buy America or BABA, pronounced BABA. And so this is a requirement that domestic contact, or basically that when you procure materials, they should have a domestic contact preference for iron, steel, manufactured products and construction materials. And this applies to infrastructure projects, basically where these materials are being installed for long-term use. And this requirement applies unless there is an approved waiver for either that product or your project in general. So that's just something I definitely want to make sure any applicant is aware of, that it cannot be ignored. It definitely does apply, and needs to be in mind as you're developing your project design and budget. And you can learn more about BIL or BABA with these links when you get access to the slides. We do periodically also hold information sessions just to help update stakeholders about what's happening. They usually occur quarterly. The most recent one was in September. So if you'd like to watch that recording, it's on the website. And you can sign up for an email list to be notified when future sessions are offered. And then along those lines, we also have the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, or IRA, as some people say. This also brought additional funding as well as some new authorities to us that also did affect WaterSMART, not in as grand of level as BIL did, but it did. So again, just worth mentioning. And again, you can learn more about this on the Reclamation website as well. Okay, so now getting back to just WaterSMART in general, we have different sub-programs, as I said, that help fund a variety of activities. So everything from, you're at the beginning stage, you're planning, you're not even sure what is the right type of project to do. From those type of activities, we have various funding opportunities to help with that. And then in the middle, maybe you need to gather more data or create a model or something. And so we've got some funding opportunities that can help with those types of activities. And then on the other side, we've got, your on the ground projects, your construction projects where you're ready to implement and get that project up and going. And just some general basics about WaterSMART. Most of the programs that I'll talk about are grant programs. Generally, there's a 50% non-federal cost share required, though that can vary among the programs. As I said earlier, applicants do need to be in the Western US, or in some cases, Alaska, Hawaii, and US territories are eligible. And then these entities need to be either states, tribes, cities, water districts, irrigation districts, in some cases nonprofits, or just other entities with water or power delivery authority. And then we generally open our funding opportunities once a fiscal year. Sometimes now we're trying to offer things more than once a fiscal year, but basically it's a competitive process and you're competing against other applications that were submitted during the same period. All right, so getting into some of our programs, we have something called the basin studies. And I'm mentioning this not so much that maybe you all are thinking of, trying to create a group to get together to submit an application for a basin study, though you're more than welcome to. But I just want to at least point out that several either were recently done in our area or are currently being finalized that are, it's a chance that covers your area. So in particular, we had a West Salt River Valley Basin study that was completed earlier this year. And then to that, the final reports are expected next year are the Lower Santa Cruz River Basin Study and the Eloy and Maricopa Stanfield Basin Study. So if you're not familiar with these, and it's in your area, I highly recommend learning more about it. Again, these are links that you can click on when you get the slides, and look at what they determined, recommendations that came out of that, or it's actually called adaptation strategies. Just kind of what does it seem like might be worthwhile solutions to deal with the issues facing water supplies in that area. And if your project is in line with some of those adaptation strategies, that is something worth mentioning in your application. So again, that's the main reason I pointed this out. Though if you're within an area that doesn't currently have a basin study and you're interested in maybe creating one, that's something worth looking into, and you can reach out to me if you'd like more information. All right, and so more on the planning stage. of the grants that we have. Another one is our Cooperative Watershed Management Program, Phase 1. We used to have a Phase 2, if you're wondering why the word Phase 1 is there. But basically, this is to fund grassroots, non-regulatory watershed groups comprised of diverse stakeholders. And this is so that they'll work together to form collaborative local solutions to address their water management needs. So this can be used to just try to form a new watershed group, or maybe it's a group that already exists, but they want to bring in more diverse stakeholders or expand their activities or focus on some particular planning activities. So if you're anywhere in that realm, you can kind of mix and match these eligible activities under your application. You know, perhaps you're only working on 2 out of those 5, you don't necessarily need to be working on all 5. This one is a little different than our other programs, where it does not require any cost share. So you can come in with $0 and request up to $300,000 in reclamation funding over 3 years, and that would be divvied out up to $100,000 per year. We also require what's called a sufficiency review for this grant, where each year of your funding, we look at the progress to determine if we think that releasing that next year of funds, that you've met the requirements to basically show that, us releasing the further funds is going to be beneficial. All right, also along with planning, we have a regional program called the Water Conservation Field Service Program. So again, unlike some of the others I'm going to talk about, this program is specific to our area. So all of Arizona and part of Southern California and Southern Nevada. So again, that would be your competition for these grants, not the entire Western US. Hawaii and the territories in the Pacific are also included. And so you can request up to $100,000 in reclamation funding, and a 50% cost share is required. And I'm going to go through some slides that describe what this can be used for. So it's more, like I said, a planning type activity. So either developing or updating either a water management plan or a water conservation plan. It can be used for what's known as a system optimization review, or SOR. And this is a really great step if you have a system and it's never had this done. It basically is a complete evaluation to kind of identify, what's needed, prioritize, future activities. And this is a great planning activity to have, have in hand when you're thinking of applying for future grants, whether it's with reclamation or other entities, to show that, hey, this is how we identified that this project is needed and is a priority and will be worthwhile. You can also design future activities with this program. So I've got a list here of some of the potential types of activities that can be designed. So converting an open conveyance system to a closed, so like piping, lining canals. SCADA is a popular one, which is supervisory control and data acquisition automation, and other types of activities as well. And then lastly, another kind of different activity that we can fund through this, which is kind of neat, is our demonstrating conservation project technologies. And so this is one of the only types of activities we fund here in reclamation where you can take a novel technology. Either it's just novel in general, it really isn't, hasn't been used anywhere in the world, or maybe it's used elsewhere in the world, but it's kind of new to the US, or it's new to our local area, and you want to test it out on a pilot scale and see if it is worthwhile. So this is a great opportunity to do that, and then share those results with others. So, it's an example that others can learn from as well as you. Okay, now moving back to our overall WaterSMART program. So again, these grants would be competing against the entire West. Another type of planning program we have is the planning and project design grants. This is a newer program that encompasses a few grant types that we already had, and then one new one, which is number 2, the project design grants. So number 1 is water strategy grants. This is for planning activities to improve water supplies or management, maybe like water marketing. And number 2, as I said, is a new one. It's quite similar to the design grant I just mentioned in our regional program, but this is basically for maybe medium to large scale projects, because you can request more funding through this opportunity than you could through the regional one. And then lastly is either developing or updating a drought contingency plan. And then moving on to more about that, you can request up to $400,000 in reclamation funding. Do note, though, that the Water Strategy Grant and Project Design Grants require at least a request of $100,000 in reclamation funding. And that's because if it's less than that, you're pretty much better off requesting going through the Regional Design Grant Program instead. These projects need to be completed within 3 years. A 50% non-federal cost share is required for the drought contingency planning, except in some exceptional circumstances. And then for the others, the amount of cost share is dependent on some eligibility criteria. It could be nothing, or it could be 25% or 50% non-federal cost share. So it depends on the project. If it's a project related to providing domestic water supply to tribal or to disadvantaged communities, it perhaps could be that 0% cost share requirement. And then if there are strong ecological benefits, like benefits to the environment, maybe you'd be eligible for the 25% cost share. Okay, moving on to that middle category, the more data and tools and science type grants. We have an applied science grant that is for the development of tools and information to support water management. And this is another one where there's different categories of cost share depending on the project. It could be either 25%, again, if there's like environmental benefits, or the standard 50% cost share. And you can request up to $400,000 in reclamation funding. And this is one of the only grants that we offer where universities are an eligible applicant, because it is so research focused. All right, and then now moving into our on-the-ground projects, implementation projects. The kind of lowest level one we have is our small-scale water efficiency projects, or SWEP, as we just like to say to abbreviate. This is to, again, it's implementation projects to modernize a water delivery system to conserve, better manage, and make more efficient use of the water supplies. So since this is small scale, the total project costs need to be $225,000 or less. Otherwise, it's better to try for one of our other grants that funds medium to large scale projects. You can request up to $100,000 in reclamation funding. There is a 50% cost share required. These projects do need to have some sort of planning activities that support them, such as a system optimization review or water management plan. Another thing to note is there is an existing Buy America waiver that applies to this program, this DOI small grants waiver. So those Buy America requirements do not apply to this program through the life of that waiver, which I believe is either like 2026 or 2028. So you would most likely be in the time frame of that waiver if you were applying for this grant in the next couple of years. Also, another benefit is we know that the recipients of these grants are usually smaller entities that don't have a lot of staff or time to, do administration. And so this is one of the only grants we have where we only require annual reporting rather than twice annual. All right, and these are the types of activities that can be funded through that. So you'll see this list is very similar to the design list I showed earlier. So canal lining or piping, municipal metering upgrades, irrigation flow measurement, installing SCADA or other automation, high efficiency indoor appliances and fixtures, and also landscape irrigation measures. And this is speaking more on like a municipality terms, not an agricultural irrigation measure, and then commercial cooling system improvements. And there is some additional kind of points that are given for projects that kind of complement maybe projects that an entity is either already doing or seeking to do in coordination with NRCS funding. And again, I just want to point out that on-farm irrigation irrigation efficiency improvements are not eligible for, basically they're not eligible for reclamation funding period, because NRCS offers on-farm funding. So we don't want to, kind of cover the same thing. So they do that, and we cover other activities. All right, and then kind of the complement to that, the larger version is the water and energy efficiency grants. And so this is very similar, just it's either medium or large scale projects. So we have 3 different funding levels. You can request up to $500,000 for a project that must be completed within 2 years, or you can request up to $2 million or $5 million for projects that are completed within 3 years. And the list of the types of projects that this can fund, again, is very similar to what I just showed, except it also includes the last bullet of renewable energy projects that are related to water management and delivery. So again, you can get some additional points for projects that complement on-farm improvements done in coordination with NRCS. All right, and so rather than water conservation, like the last 2 were, the drought resiliency projects is more about creating new water supplies, or basically like having, more water supplies available in times of drought. And so this is one where we have different funding levels, because there's a lot of different activities that can be funded through this. So in general, there is a 50% cost share required. However, we did add recently, based on the Inflation Reduction Act authorities that were created, that there's a new activity for the domestic water supply, where that only requires a 5% cost share, or it could be waived entirely, depending on meeting criteria. And this also has the 3 funding levels similar to the last one, either 500,000, 2 million, or 5 million of federal funding. Task D also can request up to $10 million. And then there's also some criteria that apply to task A and D. So let me switch to the next slide so you know what I'm talking about. So task A types of activities are infrastructure improvements. So perhaps modifying or improving an existing system, creating water storage, whether that's surface water or groundwater, or developing alternative sources of water, maybe treating water, that can now be reused in a different way that was never done before. Task B is groundwater recovery projects that supplement current water supply needs. There was a recent change to this in last year's funding opportunity, where if it's a project related to a well or groundwater recovery, it's limited to 1 well or groundwater recovery activity per application, and no more than 2 applications can be submitted each funding period by an applicant. Task C is decision support tools, modeling, or measurement. So this is less of the kind of on the ground activities, except that it, maybe could imply installing some water measurement devices to help gather data. And then lastly, that new activity is Task D, which is construction of domestic water supply projects for tribes or disadvantaged communities that do not have reliable access to water. And it is best that Task A, B, or C projects are supported by an existing drought planning effort. All right. Kind of similar to some of them that I've mentioned already, is if a project has very high environmental benefits, it might be best suited for funding under our environmental water resources projects. This has a cost share of either 25 to 50%. Again, it depends on meeting some criteria, such as how diverse the stakeholders are that are involved in the project, the amount of planning that's been done previously, and the level of environmental benefits. You can request up to $3 million in reclamation funding, and the total project cost must be $6 million or less. If it was more than that, we have an alternate program called our Aquatic Ecosystem Restorations Projects. I'm not going to go into that one today, but that one can fund larger projects than this one, depending on meeting certain criteria. And so this can fund a variety of activities as well. So it could be water conservation and efficiency projects, such as what I described under our small scale water efficiency projects or water and energy efficiency projects. But if the canal lining piping activity also for some reason also offers high environmental benefits, then this might be a good fit. It can include water management infrastructure improvements. Again, some of those activities I mentioned earlier, but also things like improving fish passage or hatcheries, salinity or temperature control projects, or infrastructure improvements to improve water supply reliability and habitat. So again, a very strong environmental focus. And then lastly, it can fund restoration projects with the nexus to water resources or water resources management. All right, and then I think the last couple programs I'm going to talk about are related to water reuse or desalination. And so I kind of lumped these together. So one funding opportunity for planning, going back to planning. I know I tried to talk all about those up front, but I decided to keep the water recycling and desalination together. So a planning activity for that can cover either planning, design, or pre-construction activities of potential new water reclamation or reuse projects, or brackish water or ocean desalination projects. So this could include any of those activities I have bullets for here, such as conducting the required feasibility study that meets reclamation requirements, because that feasibility study is needed in order to compete for reclamation's implementation funding for these types of projects in the future. You could prepare preliminary cost estimates, do site investigations, maybe do some environmental cultural resource compliance activities, or just other activities related to pre-final design. There are a couple different funding groups depending on the scale of the potential future project. Funding group 1 can request up to $1 million with a 50% cost share required. And funding group 2 is for very large scale projects, like the future project, if it were constructed, would cost over $500 million. If that's the case, for your planning efforts, you can request up to $5 million in reclamation funding, but we do also require 75% non-federal cost share. And then going along with that, if you're ready for the implementation, the construction of these types of projects, we have 4 different funding opportunities that can fund that. They are Title 16 authorized projects, Title 16 WIN Act water reclamation or reuse projects, desalination construction projects, or large-scale water recycling program. All of these require a 75% non-federal cost share. Depending on which program it is, there's either a $20 to $30 million limit to the funding that reclamation can offer. But in the case of the large-scale water recycling, there is no limit per se. But do remember, you do still have to provide 75% cost share. And again, as I mentioned, these projects do require a completed feasibility study that meets reclamation's criteria, submitted to reclamation in advance for us to review, to approve, or either it needs to already have, or I don't know if Congress is still doing it, but in the future get congressional approval for funding through the Title 16 program. So I know that was like a whirlwind, and we're almost out of time, but just to touch on a few things. So if you want more information, definitely check out the WaterSMART website. Complete the WaterSMART request information request form on our website so that you can receive automatic emails when new funding opportunities open, or when we have a webinar related to these funding opportunities, to help you learn about them and have an opportunity to ask questions to the program coordinators. And then we also, each of our funding opportunities get posted to the grants.gov website. And this is a list of the funding opportunities that are either currently open or will be opening soon. So it's a long list, so we do have a lot out there. And more information about each of the programs that we have to offer are available on the WaterSMART website. Here are direct links to each of the different programs. So if any of those sounds of interest to you, I definitely recommend taking a closer look at each of these links that apply to the projects that might be a good fit for you. And and get more information. One thing to note about each of these links is that on them, there will be examples of proposals that were selected from previous years. So you can, number one, get an idea of the types of projects that have been selected for funding in the past. And then you can also get some ideas on what is the format for your application, supposed to look like, or what maybe some ideas on how to arrange things in your application. All right. And then, as I said earlier, environmental and cultural resource compliance will apply to everything that we fund, whether or not it's a construction project or not. And so they all must meet with the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, as well as other federal environmental and cultural resource laws. So when you're developing your application, we very strongly recommend that you reach out to the local reclamation office to let them know that you're thinking of submitting an application, and to get an idea of what the environmental and cultural resource compliance requirements are going to be, as well as how much the associated costs might be. This way you can build that into your project timeline as well as your project budget and not have any surprises later on. And even if you think you have a consultant that has a good idea of what that might entail, it is reclamation that will make this determination. So it really is best to reach out to reclamation for this information and this guidance up front. All right. And so we as reclamation will be able to assist with covering at least some of the compliance costs. And this process of completing compliance can take 3 to 12 months or potentially longer, depending on the situation. And you must wait until you've received a notice to proceed issued by the grants officer before any ground disturbing activities can take place on a project. That we cannot state that enough. That is most important. If you were to start before compliance was completed, you would be in non-compliance and potentially would not be able to be eligible for the grant funding. All right, so this is an overall timeline of what our kind of application period is, plus the review period, and then those applications that are selected for award, what the process is like from there. So our notices of funding opportunity, or NOFOs, are posted and usually open for approximately 60 to 90 days. They then go through several phases of review, which last for a few months, including a review by an application review committee that's made up of different reclamation staff from across our territories. And then they'll go through a further selection phase, kind of reclamation management review, as well as in some cases the Office of Management and Budget, which is an outside entity of the federal government. And then the selections will be announced in a press release, and all applicants, those that are selected for award as well as those that are not, will be notified. Those that were selected for award would then enter the pre-award phase, which also will last for a few months. We'll work together with you to finalize your budget and your scope of work, and also gather a bit more information to just help us finalize that agreement. And then we'll award your funding. Also around this time is when the environmental compliance process will start, which again can last for several months. In cases you can start some work on your project before environmental compliance is completed, not on the ground construction, but if it's just a planning grant, or if you have some materials to purchase, you can do that while you're still waiting for compliance to be completed. And in general, our projects that we fund must be completed within 2 or 3 years, depending on the program. So this bottom arrow is probably the most important one to know, that when you're submitting an application, you really need to think towards the future, that this project, if you were selected for award, work cannot start on that for probably at least a year afterwards, after when you apply. So if it's something that you really are looking to get to soon to implement, we might not be the best source of funding for you. And then when it comes to submitting an application, as I mentioned earlier, all of our funding opportunities are posted to grants.gov. So that's where to look for the official document that is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And you want to click on the tab of the funding announcement that says related documents, and then download the full announcement plus any attachments to be sure you've got all the documents you need to review to be able to submit your application successfully. So some important things to keep in mind as you're trying to work on creating an application is start by reading the entire Notice of Funding Opportunity document. They are very long documents, but unfortunately, important information is everywhere within that document. And so you need to be aware of all of it. So do take the time to read them. I read them as well as the coordinator, just to make sure I'm always up to date on any changes that may have happened from year to year on the funding opportunities. And you can always reach out to either me or the program coordinator for that particular type of grant if you have questions. We also typically host webinars after our NOFOs open. So those are always a great source of information. Give yourself plenty of time to write that grant and submit your application. I mean, that's the case with any funding that you're applying for. We don't have templates, but we do recommend that you take what's known as the evaluation criteria and just create a Word doc and paste those into your own doc, as well as these budget attachments that we have, just to make sure that you're capturing all of the information that we're going to be looking for and answer each of the questions that we have. We also include an application checklist in our NOFOs that kind of spells out each of the things that you must submit, different forms and whatnot. So please use that and make sure that you do have all those required elements submitted. Otherwise, your application will be deemed ineligible. Also, when you're writing your application, keep in mind that the application review committee is made up, as I said, of staff from all over reclamations, states, so all over the West, and they're not necessarily familiar with your local issues, your entity. So you do need to spell out as if someone is completely unfamiliar with who you are, what your situation is, so that they've got the information in your application to rate your application. Regarding the budget, cost share, as I said, does need to be non-federal funding. So non-federal funding can be state funding. So this could be a loan through WIFA or a state revolving fund, an SRF. But keep in mind, if that is the case, that it's one of those loans, it can only be used if there's no loan forgiveness. That is because any funds applied towards loan forgiveness are usually coming from federal funding. So it's now not just solely a non-federal cost share part. If you have any questions about that, again, please reach out to us for clarification. State grants, however, though, such as the newer water conservation grants, that can be used as cost share. We distribute grant funds as reimbursement as you move along with your project, not as a just blank check up front for you to use. Also, all budget costs must be represented all project costs must be represented in your budget, whether those are ones that you think will be paid for with reclamation funds or with cost share or in-kind funds. We kind of treat the project budget all of one. We don't really differentiate what was reclamation covering versus what is you as the recipient covering. Again, a reminder that Build America, Buy America Act requirements will apply to all infrastructure projects, and unless there is a waiver that's approved for those. Again, click on that link for more information about that so that you can create your budget using the proper materials. And even if those cost more, you do need to use the materials that meet the BABA requirements if they exist. Also, you can consider inflation in your budget. We know that costs keep escalating, so you can compound costs for projects that are going to be for multi-years. Also, keep in mind that, as I said, your application is submitted now, but the project itself probably won't get started for a year from now. So you can kind of keep that in mind as you're developing your costs too, that you're really thinking a year out. The reviewers will use the budget table and the budget narrative to confirm their understanding understanding of your project scope and benefits. So again, very important to include all that information. And if you have questions when you're preparing your budget, you can reach out to some of our financial assistance office staff at the shared email box that's listed here. And then just some last tips are, again, take a look at those program web pages to look at some examples of applications that were selected in the past, just to kind of help guide you. You do need to submit your application by the deadline. We will not accept late submissions. Keep in mind that Denver is our headquarters, so the time zones that are mentioned, if it says Mountain Time, it's really Denver's time. So we're in that weird daylight savings period. Keep in mind, we're talking about Denver time, not necessarily Arizona time. You can apply for multiple grants. You can apply for funding in different programs at the same time, as long as they're not covering the same activities, project activities. You could potentially, have funding for your project from the start to finish. Receive some planning funding for us. Once that's completed, maybe you want to then design the grant with our grant funds. And then in the future, now that it's designed, you're ready to implement it, you can try for another one of our grants to actually complete construction. For large projects that maybe just have really high costs or just won't fit into our 2 or 3 year timeframes for completing projects, you can try breaking it into phases and just apply for funding for a particular phase, as long as that phase has standalone benefits that will help it, still compete well against other projects. And if your application is not selected for award, I'm sorry about that, but we do offer what's called a debriefing that will just help you, understand maybe, what was the reasons why it wasn't selected, where maybe it was weaker than other types of applications submitted and project criteria. And you can, get some advice for maybe how you could submit a stronger application, whether that's, you're going to try next time with reclamation, or if you're going to try for a different source of funding, you can still use those tips to improve your application. And then just 2 more programs that we can fund that are outside of WaterSMART are our small storage program. This is for either small surface water storage or groundwater storage projects of a capacity of 200 to 30,000 acre feet. And to be eligible for funding, this is another one where a feasibility study is required. So I do recommend, if this sounds of interest to you, take a look at this program's website, because there are some very specific criteria that must be met to even be eligible to compete for this funding. You can request up to $30 million of reclamation funding and must provide 25% of cost share. And then lastly, we have a Native American Affairs Technical Assistance Program. So as is in the name, this is only offered to tribes, and it's offered through our Native American and International Affairs Office. You can request up to $400,000 in funding for projects completed within 2 years. And there are a variety of different types of activities that can be covered, such as technical training, water management or measurement studies, or even some types of restoration projects like restoring wetlands. So a wide variety. And if you'd like more information about this, again, I recommend looking at the program website or reaching out to our local program coordinator, who is Lawrence Marquez. And so this is my contact information. So again, I am always a source for you to reach out to if you have questions. You can definitely start with me, and I can help guide you to, maybe someone above me who might be able to answer some really specific questions, or at least help you identify which funding opportunity might be the best fit for you.